Climate change is not a distant storm. It's the air I breathe. It's the food I eat.
We have so many policies, abundance of policies, 600, 300, big numbers. But what is actually happening on ground level is what counts.
Delhi's AQI is on a soaring levels. You name a new target and Delhi achieves it.
Delhi's problem is not pollution, it's population.
As they rightly said that itihasa gyanasya pramanam. So that has to be internalized very much on that factor.
Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. I mean that brings to the understanding of like we need to be contented in our desires and we don't need to be greedy.
Climate change is not a prophecy of doom. It's a call for action. For the world we enter tomorrow is not that we enter, but one that we create.
So with the ongoing COP30 at Brazil, I must say that we do not need a further round of speeches and false promises. We need conclusive actions.
As we also rightly talk about in Advait Vedanta, that Gyan is something which is internal.
They are facing crisis within a crisis. From melting ice caps to disappearing coastlines, climate change isn't a distant warning anymore. It's a live broadcast of our planet asking for help. Rising sea levels are not just swallowing land, they are droning livelihoods, cultures, and identities. Imagine an entire nation at a risk of vanishing underwater. It's not a movie plot at all. It is tomorrow's headline. So hello everyone, I welcome you all to the next episode of NextGen Talks, where we'll be having meaningful discussions led by the voices of Next IAS on issues that matter today and that are going to shape the world of tomorrow. Each episode focuses on a contemporary issue, exploring multiple dimensions. The theme for today's session is climate change and rising sea levels, threat for island nations. Let's talk about what climate change exactly is. So climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, mostly caused by human activities from burning fossil fuels to deforestation. These rising temperatures are melting polar ice and expanding ocean water, leading to sea level rise. Now, the results of this are flooded coastlines, stronger storms, and island nations like Tuvalu and Maldives fighting for survival. This topic isn't just environmental. It's economical, geopolitical, and ethical. For India too, it's a matter of deep concern as rising seas threaten our own coastal regions and millions of lives as well. From UPSC perspective, it touches environment, economy, international relations, and ethics all in one frame. So let's dive into this urgent global issue with our insightful participants from our GS Foundation batch. With us today, we have Krish, Shambhavi, Navya, and Saubhagya. Now, let's begin this conversation. My first question will be to Navya. Navya, how exactly does climate change lead to the rising sea levels and why are the island nations the most vulnerable?
Right, ma'am. So first of all, climate change's main idea is around rising temperatures, which in a domino effect lead to a lot of changes which are surrounding it. For instance, if the temperatures are rising due to global warming, which is again due to anthropogenic factors like industrialization, its emissions, vehicular emissions, and so on, we see that the oceans, as a natural response to it, keep on absorbing the heat moreover. We also know that factually oceans are absorbing around 90% of the heat which is emitted and 30% of the carbon dioxide which is emitted across the world. And rising temperatures would lead to more pressure on the oceans, and in this race of absorbing more heat, the water expands. This is a scientific phenomena that wherever the temperature rises, the molecules are loosened a little bit, and then the sea levels also as a result rise. Now, when we talk about how climate change is impactful, firstly, it has direct impacts on environment and ecology, where we see that life is directly impacted, we see health is directly impacted, there is disturbed weather pattern across it, and along with that we also see there is a special effect on SIDS, which is the small island developing states, which are mentioned in the UN records and are most vulnerable to climate change. And when we talk about SIDS, they are even at a risk of vanishing from the entire map. So that is where the concern lies.
Absolutely. And I think it is a multi-dimensional aspect, and one of the most harming aspect is economies. So how do these rising sea levels impact the economies of small island nations that depend on tourism and fishing? Now, this question is to you, Krish.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, so the paradox of climate change is that the SIDS contributes only 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, however, are facing the dire consequences of it. With that being said, I would like to highlight the climate related economic aspects of the challenge. So, the first being that the SIDS are majorly dependent on tourism for its economic growth and foreign exchange reserves. So, for example, Maldives has 21% of its GDP contributed by tourism and allied activities. The second being that being a developing nation, these economies are majorly dependent on tourism and on agriculture and fisheries sector. So the coastal aquifer intrusion, the water level rise and inundation of land is causing major unsustainable agricultural practices, and they are not able to provide for their food security. The third being that land inundation has caused infrastructural loss, which is another grave challenge for the developing nations, where the ports, the airports and the nearby coastal and the littoral areas, as we call it, are being drowned underwater, which we are not able to do anything about it. And the fourth and the last challenge here is the economic unsustainability. 40% of the SIDS nations are already facing climate debt. And the further we drag them into the vulnerabilities, they are more prone to being a bankrupt nation. We need to save them by acting now.
Absolutely, Krish. And as you mentioned, developing nation in your third point, it takes us to our second question, which is who should take the greater responsibility for climate change? Should it be developed nations or developing nations? Now, Sambhavi, this question is for you.
Thank you, ma'am. Not melodrama people, but the most visible impact of being in Delhi. Climate change is not a distant storm. It's the air I breathe, it's the food I eat, and it's actually the world I inherit, of which the responsibility is discussed today. And definitely, ma'am, in line to the question that you asked, developed nations should and actually hold a much greater responsibility in response to the or in comparison to the developing nations. And this is solely on historical factors of the economic profitability that they have taken from the inauguration of the Industrial Revolution. And also to mention, in line with the UNFCCC's foundational framework, the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. And why shouldn't the polluter pay when the polluter has the ability to pay? So it definitely is the responsibility of the global north and the industrialized countries of the west to take the responsibility, for they are running away from the responsibility and in many ways are trying to shut the mouth of the developing states when it is their opportunity to develop today.
Absolutely. And yes, as you've mentioned that they are trying to shut our mouths, and in all this, amid all this, do you think India can emerge as a leader for climate action among developing nations? Now this question is for you, Saubhagya.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, India is playing a proactive role in kind of, emerging as a leader to the fight against climate change. As Shambhavi said, that the developed nations are trying to shut them out. That is what India is doing as a reactive and proactive approach, trying to open its mouth and open the mouths of the developing nations along with India itself. So India's dictum lies in Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, that is, the whole world is a single family. And so in that case, even the developed nations that are being backed about their responsibility, so that responsibility India is trying to muster up, that yes, you should be also responsible for your historical emissions that you have emitted. So India is playing a role in that. India is playing a role in a shift from climate denial to climate justice, to climate urgency, highlighting the climate urgency that yes, the climate change is an urgent phenomenon that needs to be tackled up, and that has been the debate for around the last half century. So that is also a very well established fact. Apart from this, India is also a leader in the global south. So as a voice of global south, India can also emerge as a leader, voicing out the concerns, especially out of all these SIDs that Navya was talking about, small island developed states. So definitely India is playing a proactive role in all of this, and as a multifaceted role, India is playing an active role in being a climate negotiator, in being a promoter to the climate action talks, to the climate adaptation funds that have been also being talked about in the latest COP30s as well. And India is being a very good partner for the vulnerable nations in terms of development of their resilient, climate resilient infrastructure. So in that case, India is definitely going to take a lead role, summing up all these issues all together.
Yes, absolutely. And when we are talking about global concern, it is almost impossible not to talk about Indo-Pacific. So, how is climate change reshaping geopolitics, especially in the regions like the Indo-Pacific? Now, this question is for you, Shambhav.
Climate change in Indo-Pacific. The first thing which comes to my mind is definitely the name of countries which are facing immediate crisis-like situations, which is Bangladesh, which is Maldives, which is Kiribati, which is Tuvalu, which is Indonesia. Indonesia, we all know, has been forced to plan its shifting of capital because of groundwater pumping, leading to land subsidence, leading to rising sea levels. Impact of climate change, we all know the positive feedback mechanism. Well, ma'am, there have been many attempts when we talk about this. If we talk about Tuvalu specifically, so Tuvalu has engaged with Australia for, accommodation of its population in its territory. So it has mentioned that it would legally recognize 280 of its people annually, and keeping in mind the principle of SDG of life with dignity, and in line with this, migration with dignity. So I think climate change has substantially impacted the countries of global south and the small island developing states, but the responsibility is not theirs, for they contribute only 1% to the emissions. However, they face the highest public debt, they face the highest sufferings, they face the highest migrations. That's it.
Shambhavi, when you were talking about countries facing crisis, it made me smile because you missed one country. It was India. And the biggest crisis India is facing right now is air pollution. And being in Delhi and talking about climate change, it becomes nearly impossible not to talk about AQI, Delhi's AQI. So my next question will be to Krish. What are your thoughts on Delhi's AQI?
Ma'am, Delhi's AQI is on a soaring levels. You name a new target and Delhi achieves it. So it comes amid a multifaceted challenges, and there are various factors that contribute to it. The first being the geographical factors. So the location of Delhi is in such a place where in the winters we do not have a good wind shear. So there are stagnant winds which does not allow pollution to move from point A to point B. So the pollution gets trapped, and we have an urban dome type of a structure. The second being the parali burning in the neighboring states and the rural areas nearby, namely Punjab and Haryana. Although we have curbed a lot on the parali burning, but it is still a burning issue. The third being the concentration of people, that is the population density in Delhi. Delhi NCR is a region surrounded by a cluster of cities, be it Gurgaon, Noida, Ghaziabad. So these are also very well developed industrial towns, which not only contributes to the fossil fuel emissions and the factory emissions. The people living here have a decent standard of living, which also contribute to the vehicular emissions as well. So all these challenges makes Delhi very vulnerable to the air, the bad air which we are breathing in today.
Absolutely.
I would
Yes.
like to just raise a point here that is very ground to earth that everybody is seeing around. Like we are talking about the pollution and all, and we are talking about standard of life, quality of living. What about those vendors who are there on the roads? I mean, their whole life is there. They are earning over there. They're sleeping over there. So what about them? We can afford masks. Even we can afford like air purifiers, the upper standards of the society. They can afford all those things. In summers they can afford AC. In winters they can afford, due to pollution, this air purifier. But what about those vulnerable sections whose whole life is surrounding, according to that problems only? So we need to talk about that as well. We need to highlight that aspect as well, and that is also a very urgent need of the governance that Delhi needs to focus upon.
Absolutely, absolutely, completely right, Saubhagya. They are facing crisis within a crisis. So they are in a bigger crisis right now. And yes, often we forget them because we have our own issues going on, our own problems going on. I'm not able to breathe properly. I need to buy that new mask. Oh, I'm asthmatic. So yes, we often forget them. And the main cause is still debatable because we are still stuck in debates of traffic, pollution, stubble burning, firecrackers. We have so many debates, but one thing that we are forgetting is something bigger might be the impact. There have been wars all over the world. And do you think that is impacting the pollution, that is triggering the pollution? What are your thoughts on this?
When we talk about war, we talk about geopolitics and the geopolitical dimension of climate change is again, ma'am, specific to the context. Countries actually have been able to provide different, like there's a stark contrast in the lifestyle of people who are living in probably India or nearby countries, or probably in the West, the Europe. So the air we breathe is, it is different, and so our lungs are. Well, this is in one context if we talk about air pollution, but climate change does not restrict to this. Climate change leading to the positive anomaly of temperature, then to melting polar ice caps in the Greenland and Antarctica, to rising sea levels, have led to loss of territory, have led to loss of sovereignty, again to those small island developing states, who have lost not just their land, but they have lost resources. They've lost their exclusive economic zones, which amounts to fisheries, which amounts to mining, and which amounts to money. They also have power asymmetry in global platforms such as UNFCCC, may it be Conference of Party meetings, may it be Paris Climate Agreement, which is a joke today, for it has been 10 years to its passage and we haven't been able to commit to our commitments. Then also, they face strategic vulnerabilities in social, economic, and diplomatic aspects. For they have resources, for they are surrounded by resources. However, they have weak bargaining power. They are dependent on the influential powers of the West for funds. They run Global Climate Fund for them, but they're not recognizing the refugees that result out of climate migration. So that is the irony.
Absolutely. And when we talk about all these problems, there has to be a solution out of it. And mostly when we talk about solution, people say education is something which is the biggest solution of all the problems. And does that apply here? So my next question will be to Navya. Navya, do you think awareness in climate education can be a powerful technological tool, as powerful as technology in tackling climate change?
Absolutely, ma'am. There's a US research on this as a private project, that if a particular sector of population is educated about climate change for straight 30 years, then there's a possibility of reduction of 18 gigatons of CO2 emissions all over the world, all over that particular sector of population. So, and which is similar to the targets we try to achieve with solar energy and other renewable source of energies as well. So, yes, very much education education not even is not only limited to the mental, let's say, makeup of the population, but also internalizing the very ethos we have. I would like to bring in the ancient practices which India as a subcontinent used to practice for climate change and climate resilience. Naturally, we were gifted with mangrove forest to, let's say, fight salinity, to fight saltwater intrusions. But we also see that there were local water harvesting practices, like we had bavdis, which we call, which were paved inside. We also had which were like raw digged, we can say potholes, which absorb groundwater, which absorbed rainwater and added to groundwater table. We also we always had a culture of worshipping nature, when we have for instance Chhat Puja, wherein we worship nature. So our culture has always been that, and as they rightly said, that itihasa jnanasya pramanam. So that has to be internalized very much on that factor, and not just the modern education which has to fuel this, but also the ancient education which we often talk about, going back to the itihasa or the history we had.
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned renewable energy. How does investing in renewable energy create both climate resilience and economic opportunities? This question is to you, Krish.
Ma'am, so the climate change crisis which we have right now is a double-edged sword, and we must utilize this and make this abda as an afsar. So there are various opportunities which climate change also offers. The first being the research and development and innovation which we can do in various new industries. For example, the EV sector and the renewable energy sector, we've discovered tidal energy, the solar power energy, the wind energy, and various other sources of energy, because we had to shift from the traditional fossil fuels. The second being that these industries also create various new green jobs, which we call it. So it may range from manufacturing, research and development, and be it implementation, servicing of, for say, solar powers. So these are the jobs created. And if we talk about sustainable agriculture, which we have to shift amid the rising climate crisis, so it offers immense growth for farmers. The problem which we have for our farmers, which we aim to double the farmers' income, that also is an adding contribution to how we can tackle this whole crisis through a holistic development. And yes, ma'am.
Yes, absolutely, Krish. And I don't know, investing in renewable energy, is it beneficial for us? Because I don't know if you have heard about it. Recently, there was this case of Great Indian Bustard, and India has a target of 500 gigawatt renewable energy to be generated till 2030. But Great Indian Bustards are actually dying because of that. I don't know if you've read about it or not, but how does India balance this developmental goal with its climate commitments? Do you have any answer to this, Saubhagya?
Yes, ma'am, exactly. India is actually trying to, have a very good balance of these. There has always been a debate around development versus environment. So there has also, I mean, always been a shift around these two words. So definitely we have to focus on environment, and India's approach towards environment and towards development, it's not in isolation, it's in integration. So in that aspect, we are having both of the aspects in the biocentric environment policies that we are having. So definitely we are having challenges with respect to, as you are talking about, that the GIBs are getting harmed because of those the renewable energy resources or the power lines that are being there. And we have like coastal regulation zones that we are having. So in that case as well, the management or the land acquisition problems, the displacement problems, there are challenges, various challenges with respect to that. But amidst those challenges, I mean, we are trying to be more adaptive to the people, more at the ground level, that how we can be so much supportive to the people that they can be relocated at a good place. And in that case also, there is a, as Shambhavi was talking about, there are internal migration as well. I mean, in Bangladesh we can see that people are migrating from the coastal cities towards Dhaka, that is the capital. So that there is another challenge of the urban space that are getting overemphasized upon. So that challenge as well we need to tackle. So saying that, I mean, the urban space, we can see Delhi how congested it is, and the pollution aspect is just adding to it. So these are certain challenges, but definitely we are having a solutions. I mean, with respect to India as well, India is trying to mitigate these things, adopting both the adaptation and mitigation measures. Like for coastal intrusions, we are having hard engineering objects like gryons. We are having sea walls, sea mounts. So those kind of things we are having to implement there in coastal regions. And apart from the renewable energy resources that we have committed as a part of NDCs, that definitely we are trying to increase. We are trying to do more afforestation. We are trying to, forest also act after oceans. They are the second most, carbon sink absorber. So that thing also we are trying to engage. So overall, India is engaging in a multifaceted policy, and it is developing. I mean, it is developing along with the balanced aspect of development versus environment debate.
Very rightly said, Saubhagya. And a few days back, I was reading this one article which said that Delhi's problem is not pollution, it's population. And until and unless the population problem is solved or an alternative is being created in their own states, may it be for opportunities, may it be for livelihood, a better status of living, I don't think this population problem is going to be solved. And climate migration is all over the world. And I don't know, is it a future security concern for the world? What do you think?
Definitely, ma'am. Climate migration is a major security concern for the world. And we don't, but we should talk about cooperation, mobility, and security. Now, to be a bit technical, climate migration happens internally, cross border, and even temporary displacements have been seen. And according to a Statista report 2023, we are expecting 170 million displacements by 2050, which is a huge number. And the discussion upon these issues is unrendered. Even the refugees that result out of climate migration are not provided legal recognition in the UN Refugees Convention 1951. And though India is not even has ratified that, however, on the global level, we have not recognized climate refugees. So climate migration is a major concern, and it is internal, as in Bangladesh. It is external in countries such as Kiribati, people migrating to Fiji. And it is a major concern which results into social, economic, and psychological impacts also, which is a debate unrendered. For a group of people migrating from place A to B actually become a minority in place B. And people, there's this stereotypical and prejudice, also stigma attached, for there is no, or like no is an extreme word, but little scope for intermingling. So there are a lot of impacts out of climate migration.
Absolutely. But I would like to add something to what you said. When we talk about climate migration and when we talk about Bangladeshi people coming to India, we often forget that Indians are also migrating to some other place. And that's, again, a big issue, because we Indians, we are migrating to Japan, for example. There can be many different reasons for it. It can be climate change, it can be other opportunity reasons. But isn't that a big problem? Don't you think so?
Definitely, ma'am. It is a big problem because we see that along with migration, the problem of brain drain is also something which is gaining a lot of attention. So, in search of opportunities in the developing, from the developing world to the developed world, we see that there's a lot of talent which is drained alongside the migration. And the recent tariffs, the recent restrictions on visa from the US's side, it is making it even more difficult for the people who have migrated, as rightly pointed out by Shambhavi, Shambhavi, that is a difficulty in intermingling when we talk about out migration from India as well. But we often see that there is internal migration within the states of India as well, because there is a study which says that Mumbai, Goa, and even Run of Kutch, which are low-lying areas, are at risk. We have Andaman and Nicobar, we have Lakshadweep. So they are, although on a very higher elevation as compared to the SIDS, but then they're still at risk. And people migrating from there to mainland is also something which we see that in the internal society, they feel somewhere or the other they are sort of out grouped or something, because we are here in Delhi from different states, and we can very well feel it that sometimes there are instances wherein we see that people are out migrated. But then this is India's beauty, that we are unity in diversity, and wherever we are meeting each other, even if it is abroad, we meet each other, we see these are Indians. We also try to, as mentioned by Saubhagya, that we embody the philosophy of Vasudev Kutumbakam. So it is very much internalized in our minds that we make migration easy for people, at least in India.
Very well said. Very well said, Navya. And adding on to that question, my question will be to Krish. Can we say that climate change is widening the gap between developed and the developing nations? And this climate migration is happening mostly because of climate change.
Definitely, ma'am. I think the wide gap between the developing and the developed nations is still on the rise, and the effects of climate change has adversely affected that. So there are three dimensions to it. The first being that the historical emissions. So the developed nations have contributed 70% to the global greenhouse gas emissions. So they must bear the burden of that, as pointed out by Shambhavi. The second is that unequal vulnerability. The low-lying atolls like Maldives, the Kiribati and Tuvalu, they are on an average 1 to 2 meters height. So they are more vulnerable, and adding on to that, they have very limited area. They cannot expand, or they do not have the unfortunately opportunity for urban sprawl. So that is a major restriction which they face there. And the third aspect here is the unequal capacity. They do not have the adequate funding, the climate finance which we talk about, to tackle these challenges. The multilateral institutions like the Global Green Fund are being controlled by the West and the developed nations, but the developing nations are in the most dire need of that. So there must be a democratized world order where we must ensure that we do our bit as the leader of the global South, as an emerging world economic leader and socio-political leader. India must be the voice of the global South to help them mitigate these challenges.
Absolutely. As you've rightly said, that India must be the voice of global South to mitigate these challenges. And this raises a serious question. How is actually India contributing to global efforts to tackle climate change and rising sea levels? Is it actually happening? My question is to Saubhagya.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, we can very well say that India is definitely playing a lead role in tackling climate change in general and sea level rising. The challenges that are coming within, in particular, with respect to that as well. So right from the participation in Rio Earth Summit that was originated, I mean that began since 1992. So India has been active participator in all the environmental global forums, discussions and participations with respect to that. So the evolution, if we see the evolution with respect to UN actions that has been taken over with respect to climate change and particularly the rising sea levels. So we can evolve that into a three strategical approach, or we can say that there have been an evolution right from beginning from Barbadoa's plan of action that was initiated in 1994, that has been acted upon by Mauritius strategy in 2015. I guess it's 2015 or 2005. So that has been advanced upon by Mauritius strategy. And thereafter we have Samoa pathway that was also the UN actions that was talking about the challenge of rising sea level. With respect to that, it is highlighting various multiple aspects. Along with mitigation, it talks about the conservation of biodiversity as well. It talks about the inclusive growth as well, which India is a firm supporter of. I mean, India itself believes in a fair, equitable and just distribution of resources as well, and the tackling of climate change as well. So in that case also, India believes in supporting these countries. So as per India's actions are regarding with respect to the sea level rising, we can see that India has adopted the schemes like CDRI at the international level. India has initiated along with France International Solar Alliance, that is also again boosting the renewable sources of energy, and they are promoting these renewable sources of energy in the island nations as well. India has been an active player in providing these HADR, human assistance disaster relief measures also to the very most vulnerable island nations. I mean, there is a forum, that is FIPEC, Forum for India and Pacific island countries and island nations. So within that case, India talks about these South Pacific islands that are at the verge of extinction, as Sambhavi was talking about Tuvalu, about Kiribati. So all these islands, they are just vanishing out of the map. So India is advocating the voices of those islands as well. So in that case also, and right now if we highlight about the COP30 that is going to take place. So there are reports, like there have been talks about around 600 projects that the COP has taken up, but out of that, the discussions or the projects that they are touching, that is just around 300. Rest 300 are just neglected. So that is also one of the implementational aspect challenge that India is trying to highlight, that okay, let's not show so much climate activism that we can't even adopt these common goals that we are trying to achieve. So in that case also, India is trying to last year COP29, there was talk about the fund that was talked about, $300 billion per year annually, that the developed nations will be giving towards. So within that case also, there are a further differentiation, like the Article 19 that talks about, Article 9.1 talks about direct funding, Article 9.3 talks about mobilization of fund. So these developed nations, they are mostly focusing on mobilization of funds, that is through public or private resources or through corporate bonds, but they are not active towards direct funding. That they have been historical emitter to that, and it is their responsibility. So India is highlighting those steps as well. So I think India is having a multi-active approach in that, and again we can see that in the India's dictum that was highlighted in G20's presidencies as well, where the motto was one earth, one family, and one future. So we are definitely targeting towards one future. So I think in that case, India is actively playing a role towards tackling climate change.
I think India is really good when it comes to paperwork, when it comes to things on paper. But is it actually being implemented is the question.
That is why we say, ma'am, in India, there is not policy paralysis. There is implementation paralysis.
Yes, absolutely. We have so many policies, abundance of policies, 600, 300, big numbers. But is it what is actually happening on ground level is what counts. So do you have something to say on this?
Definitely, ma'am. When we talk about, let's say, as basic as renewable energy, India's around 50% dependence is still on coal. So we see that while we are in a need to develop ourselves, we are counted as a developing nation. We have our own energy needs with a vast population basis. We find it challenging to integrate climate change, let's say, solutions into our policy making. Although on paper, as very much highlighted by Saubhagya and as well you, that there are a lot of policies which are there, but implementation is pending. And as you very well highlighted, that along with renewable energies, we have environment and ecological cost as that of great Indian bastards. But then the major problem lies with finances and funds, as also highlighted by a lot of trusted news articles, that even for NCAP program for Delhi's air pollution, we see that only 1/3 of the funds are being utilized, and which is very problematic, because when we have funds, we should have them utilized on, in reality as well. And regarding the logistical challenges, we see that even if there is technology, we find it difficult to transfer it wherever it is needed. While India is doing a very good job in, let's say, from where I come, which is Rajasthan, that we have a lot of windmills for wind energy, but then it accounts only for a lesser part of renewable energy all over. And we now have eyes on nuclear energy, since India is a very India has huge reserves for thorium. We are working on these 3-stager nuclear program to utilize thorium to have nuclear energy for commercial and civil bases as well. So.
Yes, absolutely, Navya. Very rightly said. And my next question will be to Shambhavi. Shambhavi, from an ethical perspective, do you think it's fair that the nations contributing least to emissions face the worst impacts?
It is not ethical, ma'am. Who will say it is ethical? And it comes with the debate who caused it versus who is suffering. With 10 million hectares of trees being cut annually globally, why only these small island developing states have to face 10% GDP loss because of tropical cyclones? Why only they have to face an estimated $476 billion loss in the coming decades? So definitely, it is, a paradox that who has caused it versus who has to suffer. And secondly, I would talk about the loss of right to nationhood because of climate migration resulting into refugees. So, don't they have the right to survival? Don't they have the right to preserve their culture in their own land? And don't they have the right to nationhood? Then comes the concept of climate justice, which is, again, not discussed upon. For these nations, there's inequity, there's inequity on a large scale. For the emissions they have not caused, they are spending money, making expenditure to make seawalls to protect them for something they've not caused. Intergenerational ethics. Emitters of today have to realize that they should, if they're not able to expand, they should preserve the homeland that they're given for the coming generations. I think this is the bare minimum.
Yes, absolutely. That's the bare minimum. Yes.
Yeah, I have something to add. As Shambhavi very much said that a huge chunk of GDP goes into, let's say, climate resilient infrastructure as well. There's a island nation which is categorized into SIDS. It's known as Dominica in the Caribbean. So by 2030, it will be the first SIDS to become completely climate resilient because it had a major cyclone attack back when it had to expend around 244% of its GDP, which was really huge. And on an average, as per UN studies, around 50% of the GDP across SIDS is used in climate resilient infrastructure and climate mitigation strategies and funding the seawall projects, as very much highlighted by Shambhavi. And Maldives is up to floating cities, so and seawall making. So I think that is also there where fundings are required.
Absolutely, absolutely. Funds are very important, and yes, they are required. So I think we have covered the topic multi-dimensionally now. We have talked about environmental dimensions, we have talked about economic dimensions, geopolitical dimensions, and India's role and the policies that India has been implementing. Now it's time for way forward. Now let's understand what all these people, all these young minds have concluded from this discussion. We'll start with Krish.
Yes, ma'am. So, as Barack Obama quoted, we are the first generations to feel the effect of climate change, and we are the last generations which can do something about it. So, with the ongoing COP30 at Brazil, I must say that we do not need a further round of speeches and false promises. We need conclusive actions. We need seawalls being built, we need mangroves being reimplanted, we need afforestation practices, we need sustainable agricultural, ecological tourism, and further things to promote. As also pointed out by Saubhagya earlier, we are of the ethos of Vasudev Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, and one future. We must also further our vision, not just limiting to a Viksit Bharat, but a Viksit world.
Shambhavi.
Yes, ma'am. So there's one thing firstly we need to understand, that climate change is not a prophecy of doom. It's a call for action. For the world we enter tomorrow is not that we enter, but one that we create. And in line with this, we must strengthen the global climate commitments. One example is Paris Agreement. There are many. And we need a strong monitoring mechanism under bodies such as UNFCCC. Secondly, there should be climate finance and technology transfer, and the developed countries must meet and then expand their commitments that they have made. For example, the per year climate finance pledge of US dollar 100 per year. So this is one example. And the nations must also update their nationally determined commitments. So that is it from my end.
Navya.
Right, ma'am. All I can conclude from this multifaceted discussion is that definitely we need to work upon technology, we need to work upon climate resilient infrastructure, funding. But the main thing which is there still prominent is to internalize the ethos of climate change, which we see that they were in ancient India when we talk about them. We had climate resilient practices. Naturally, we used to align with what we call Prakruti, Ma Prakruti. So we had, let's say, water harvesting systems. We had mangrove forests in place, which are natural barriers for us. So internalizing this has to be the major part of climate education. And as we also rightly talk about in Advait Vedant, that Gyan is something which is internal. Brahman and Atman are something which are realized internally. So going back to our internal civilizations is something which we can bring change through. And although funding is difficult, convincing the developed world to fund the developing nations who are in a crisis is difficult, but internalizing this and understanding this as a responsibility is easy, and it can make changes.
Samarth.
Definitely, as Navya is highlighting, that we have to internalize the values. So for that, our Prime Minister has advocated for Mission Life, that is lifestyle for environment. So let's make it a bottom-up approach instead of top-down approach, and adopt the environmental lifestyle in our daily habits. What we talk, what we eat, what we gather around. So let's make that as a habit and save resources, save energy. And at last, I like to quote one of the shloks that Aniruddha sir keep highlighting in the class, that Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. I mean that brings to the understanding of like we need to be contented in our desires, and we don't need to be greedy, because as Mahatma Gandhi ji also said that there is sufficient for everyone's need but not for everyone's greed. So that should be a holistic approach towards the climate change.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with what all four of you said. As Krish mentioned, that it is not a time of speeches, it is a time to act, it is a time to implement on ground level policies. And then Shambhavi mentioned that it is a call for there should be call for action, and then there are lessons from our history that we can learn. And lastly, implementing things in our day-to-day life is very important. Not talking about what the government is doing, we're not talking about what others are doing, what the world is doing. We need to start from our houses, we need to start from some basic things, just maybe planting a small plant. That is something we can start from. And yes, this is what the voices of Next IAS think. What do you think? Do tell us in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed today's video, please do like, share and subscribe to our channel. I will see you in another video. Until then, bye-bye. Take care.